It was just another ordinary school morning. A bright classroom, notebooks open, pencils tapping. But in the middle of that routine, one quiet mistake changed everything. A black student, barely 16, found himself staring at flashing red and blue lights outside his classroom window, called there not for violence, not for danger, but for something far smaller. Within minutes, what should have been a lesson in learning turned into a nightmare of humiliation and fear. Why did a teacher believe the police were the answer? And what unfolded next would shake an entire community. Marcus was the kind of student teachers usually described as quiet but thoughtful. 16 years old, he loved sketching sneakers in the margins of his notebooks, dreaming of one day becoming a designer. His mornings began like most kids his age, shoving books into his backpack, rushing out the door, and trading jokes with friends in the hallway before class. To him, school was routine, predictable, even safe. But beneath that sense of normalcy, something darker was waiting. A tension he couldn't see, yet one that had been building for years inside those walls. It wasn't about grades or homework. It was about perception. The way some saw him not as a student with potential, but as a problem waiting to happen. That morning, Marcus took his usual seat by the window, never suspecting that this ordinary day would unravel into something extraordinary. By the time the final bell was supposed to ring, his name would echo through whispers, his reputation shattered, and his childhood innocence tested in the harshest way imagined. The morning passed like any other. Pages turned, pencils scratched, and Marcus kept his head down, sketching lightly in the corner of his notebook while the lesson dragged on. But then, it happened. The moment that would turn an ordinary school day into something far more sinister. His pencil slipped, a doodle where an answer should have been, a harmless distraction, the kind nearly every student is guilty of. But the teacher didn't see it that way. Her eyes narrowed, locking onto Marcus with something colder than simple disapproval. To her, his quiet creativity wasn't harmless. It was defiance. She walked slowly down the aisle, her heels striking like a metronome of judgment, stopping right beside his desk. The room fell into that tense silence students know too well, when one person becomes the target and everyone else is just waiting for the storm to hit. Marcus expected a reprimand, maybe a note home, at worst detention. But instead, she marched to the front of the room, picked up the phone mounted on the wall, and spoke just 3 words that changed everything. "Send an officer." The class froze. Whispers rippled across the rows. Marcus felt every eye on him, confusion mixing with fear. Was she serious? For drawing in his notebook? For not paying attention? The minutes stretched like hours, and then came the sound. Heavy boots in the hallway, radios crackling, and the sudden flash of blue and red bleeding through the window blinds. The door swung open. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, their presence towering over the rows of students. The teacher pointed directly at Marcus, her voice sharp, almost rehearsed. "That's him!" Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. He hadn't broken a law. He hadn't hurt anyone. Yet here he was, the center of a scene that felt more like a crime drama than a classroom. The officers moved toward him, their belts heavy with weapons, their expressions unreadable. One of them told him to stand. His legs trembled as he pushed his chair back, the screech of metal on tile echoing louder than any alarm. Around him, classmates whispered, some with wide eyes of fear, others with smirks that suggested they'd already decided who he was. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. What defense could he offer when the system was already against him? His teacher's judgment was enough to summon armed authority, and now every second felt like it was pulling him deeper into a trap. As they led him out of the classroom, backpacks rustled, phones slipped out of pockets. He knew what those screens would capture. Not Marcus the student, not Marcus the artist, but Marcus the suspect. A story rewritten in real time, with no chance for him to correct it. And in that walk down the hallway, escorted by police like a criminal, he felt something break inside. Not just his sense of safety, but the belief that school was ever meant to be a place of protection. What waited outside that door was still a mystery, but Marcus already understood one thing. Once the world saw him through this lens, there was no going back. The hallway felt endless, every step echoing like a drumbeat of shame. Marcus tried to keep his head down, but it didn't matter. Students lined the lockers, staring, whispering, recording. The officers flanked him on either side, their presence a cage he couldn't escape. And then, as if the humiliation weren't enough, one officer's hand brushed against his cuffs. The metallic click froze the air. Handcuffs. In school. For what? His heart hammered so loud he swore the whole hallway could hear it. He thought of his mother, of how she always told him to stay calm, to never give them a reason. But what reason had he given now? A drawing? A teacher's suspicion? The officer grabbed his wrist, cold steel tightening around his skin. Marcus felt the stares burn deeper, saw the phones tilt higher. This wasn't discipline anymore. This was a public execution of his dignity. And the worst part? No one spoke. Not the classmates who knew him, not the teachers who had taught him. Silence filled the hallway like approval. He looked up, and for the first time, saw his reflection in one of the phone screens. Not Marcus the student, not Marcus the artist, just another black kid in cuffs, another story already written before he could tell it. The crowd grew louder, some gasping, some laughing nervously, others muttering words he'd heard too many times before. The teacher stood in the doorway, arms folded, face hard as stone, as though satisfied justice was being served. And in that moment, Marcus realized the truth. This wasn't just about a single mistake in class. This was about how quickly a system could decide he didn't belong, how easily innocence could be turned into guilt with nothing more than a phone call. The cuffs locked with a final snap. Cameras flashed. The officers pulled him forward. And Marcus knew this was the moment that would follow him forever. Marcus was eventually released that afternoon. No charges. No crime. Just a misunderstanding written down in sterile school paperwork. But the damage had already been done. By the time his mother arrived, tears in her eyes and fury in her voice, the videos had already spread through the school. Marcus in handcuffs, Marcus the troublemaker, Marcus the threat. His reputation was shattered in the span of minutes, and nothing on paper could erase what everyone had already seen. For Marcus, the bruises weren't on his wrists, they were in his spirit. The humiliation of being paraded like a criminal in front of his peers carved a wound deeper than any detention or suspension ever could. He stopped raising his hand in class, stopped sketching in his notebook, stopped believing that school was ever meant to be a safe place for someone like him. And yet, Marcus's story isn't rare. Across the country, black students are punished more harshly, suspended more often, and criminalized at younger ages for the very same behaviors overlooked in others. What happened to Marcus wasn't an accident. It was a reflection of a system that too often sees color before it sees character. The image of him in cuffs is more than a memory. It is a warning, a reminder of how quickly childhood can be stolen, how easily innocence can be erased, and how silently entire communities can be scarred. So the question remains, how many more students like Marcus must be silenced before change is forced into the walls of every classroom? How many more stories will end in humiliation before we admit that the real lesson isn't discipline, it's justice?